I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Columbus, Ohio. It's one of those places where people still wave to each other and leave their doors unlocked during the day. I moved here about a year ago, right after graduating college. I just started a remote job and figured a small rental house away from the city would help me focus. The place isn't fancy, just a single-story home backed by a patch of woods. During the day it's peaceful. Birds, the smell of pine, the hum of lawnmowers in the distance. But when night falls, it's different. The woods turn pitch black. You can't see past the porch light, and sometimes you'll hear things moving, soft steps, branches cracking, like something's wandering just beyond the trees. I used to tell myself it was just deer. But one night last fall, I realized whatever was out there wasn't an animal. And it wasn't just passing by. It was watching me. It started small, things you wouldn't normally think twice about. A faint crunch outside my window when I was working late, or my motion light flicking on for a second and then off again. The first few times it happened, I brushed it off. This house is old, the woods are alive, and raccoons are common around here. But after a while, the pattern started to feel deliberate. One night around 11, I was making tea when I noticed the motion light trigger again. I peeked out the kitchen window, expecting to see a raccoon scurry across the yard, but nothing was there. Just the empty patch of grass and the black wall of trees behind it. A few days later, I found my garbage can tipped over. The lid wasn't just off, it was missing. I found it about 20 feet away in the woods, perfectly upright, like someone had placed it there. Another night, I heard a faint tapping on my back door, like a single fingernail against the glass. I froze. The sound stopped. When I finally worked up the nerve to look, the porch was empty. I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe the wind knocked things over. Maybe the noise was just branches brushing the door. But the feeling, that crawling awareness that someone was out there, wouldn't go away. Then, one evening, as I was closing my curtains, I caught a glimpse of something at the edge of the woods. A shape, tall, still, almost blending into the darkness. For a moment I thought it was just a tree stump, until I realized it hadn't been there before. And even after I stepped back from the window, that uneasy feeling didn't fade. After that night, things changed from strange to terrifying. It wasn't just noises anymore, it was evidence. The next morning, I noticed muddy footprints on my back porch. They were human, bare, and they led straight up to the sliding door before stopping. The weirdest part? There were no prints leading away. It looked like someone had walked up in the middle of the night, stood there for a while, and vanished. I tried to convince myself it was just some kids messing around, but the idea didn't hold up. Who walks barefoot through freezing mud just for a prank? That night, I barely slept. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to what sounded like whispering, faint, broken words that I couldn't quite make out. I held my breath, straining to listen. It was coming from outside my bedroom window. I turned off my lamp and sat there in the dark, heart pounding. The whispering stopped. Then came a slow dragging sound, like someone's palm sliding across the wall. I called out, "Hello," but there was no answer. Just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. When I finally looked through the blinds, my motion light was on again. And right in the center of the yard, halfway between the house and the trees, stood a person. They weren't moving, just standing there, facing me. I could barely make out their shape, but I knew they were watching. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the police, but by the time I grabbed my phone and looked again, the yard was empty. The next morning, I checked the grass where they'd been standing. The dew was disturbed, pressed down, proof someone had really been there. That's when the fear stopped being vague. It was real. Someone was coming onto my property at night. Someone who wanted me to know they were there. For the next few nights, I kept every light on. I slept with my phone in my hand and my curtains shut tight. But even behind the glass, I could feel it, that cold, watching presence lingering outside, waiting for me to slip up. The night it all came to a head was a Thursday. It was cold, clear, and absolutely silent outside, the kind of silence that makes every little sound echo in your head. I was sitting on the couch watching TV, trying not to think about the last few nights, when I heard it, a soft creak coming from the back door. At first, I thought it was the house settling. But then it came again. Slower this time. Longer. Like someone easing pressure onto the door handle. My blood ran cold. I muted the TV and listened. The handle moved, just slightly, but enough for me to see the metal glint in the dim light. Someone was trying to open the door. I stood up quietly, my phone already in my hand, ready to call 911. But before I could, there was a sound from the window across the room. 3 slow knocks. I froze in place. My curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint outline of a hand pressed against the glass. That was enough. I ran to my bedroom, locked the door, and called the police. As I whispered to the dispatcher, I could hear footsteps circling the house, heavy, deliberate. They stopped right outside my room. The floorboards creaked under their weight. Then silence. When the police finally arrived about 15 minutes later, there was no one there. They searched the property, the woods, everything, nothing. But the back door's handle had been scratched, like someone had tried to force it open. And in the dirt outside my window were more barefoot prints, larger this time. The officers told me it was probably a trespasser, maybe a drifter or someone on something. But I knew better. Whoever that was, they'd been watching me for weeks, waiting for the right moment. After that night, I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a few things and moved into a friend's apartment in the city the very next morning. For weeks, I kept waiting for an update from the police, anything. But they never found a suspect. No fingerprints, no footprints past the yard, nothing on the cameras the neighbors set up later. It was like whoever had been out there just disappeared. I still don't know what they wanted. Nothing was stolen, no doors were broken. Just the quiet certainty that someone had been watching me, learning my habits, getting closer every night. Sometimes I wonder if they ever came back to that house after I left. If they stood there again, staring at the empty windows, realizing I was gone. But the worst thought, the one I can't shake, is that maybe they followed me. Because every now and then, even here in the city, I'll catch the faint sound of footsteps outside my window long after midnight. And just like before, when I look, there's no one there. I was 16 when this happened. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving me home alone for the first time. We lived in a small, quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Denver, the kind of place where every house looked the same and nothing bad ever really happened. It was early November, and the nights were getting colder. I remember how still everything felt that Friday evening. No cars, no wind, just that heavy quiet that comes right before snow. I ordered a pizza, watched some movies, and tried to enjoy the freedom of being home alone. Around 10 p.m., I started hearing faint crunching sounds outside, like someone stepping on frozen leaves. I figured it was just one of the neighbor's cats. But then I realized something weird. The sound wasn't moving away. It was circling the house. At first, I laughed it off. But after a few minutes, I started to feel it. That tight, uneasy sensation in my chest that told me I wasn't actually alone. The sound kept coming and going, soft crunches like cautious steps. I turned off the TV and listened closely, hoping it was just my imagination. But the moment I stood up, I heard it again, this time right outside the living room window. I walked over slowly and peeked through the blinds. Nothing. Just the dark outline of my yard and the streetlight flickering at the corner. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or maybe the pizza guy getting lost. But when I checked the driveway, my car was the only one there. After a while, things went quiet again, and I tried to shake it off. I made some popcorn, started another movie, and began to relax until I noticed something strange. The porch light, which I'd turned on earlier, was off. I clearly remembered flipping the switch myself, and I hadn't gone near the door since. I walked over to the window by the entryway and looked outside. That's when I saw it. The doormat was missing. It wasn't blown away either. It was gone. A weird chill went through me. Who takes a doormat? Trying not to freak out, I double-checked the locks, closed all the blinds, and turned the TV back on for background noise. But every few minutes, I swore I could hear faint scraping, like someone dragging something across the siding. I told myself I was being paranoid. That's what everyone does when they're home alone, right? You start to imagine things. But deep down, I knew this wasn't my imagination. There was something, or someone, outside, moving slow, careful, like they didn't want to be seen. And the worst part was the feeling that whoever it was, wasn't leaving anytime soon. Around midnight, I decided to go upstairs to my room. The scraping outside had finally stopped, and I convinced myself I was just being dramatic. But the moment I switched off the downstairs lights, I noticed a faint glow through the window, like someone was shining a flashlight toward the house. I froze halfway up the stairs. The light flickered once, then disappeared. I waited for it to come back, but it didn't. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera app, using it like a mirror to peek through the upstairs window without being seen. That's when I saw it. Someone was standing across the street, just barely inside the circle of light from the lamppost. They weren't moving, just facing my house. The distance made it hard to see details, but I could tell it was a man, tall, wearing dark clothes, maybe a hoodie. I watched for a full minute, hoping he'd just walk away. He didn't. He just stood there, still as a statue. I locked myself in my room and texted my mom, pretending I was fine, not wanting to scare her. But I couldn't stop checking the window every few minutes. Around 12:30, I peeked again, and he was gone. Relief hit me like a wave, until I noticed something else. The motion light by the garage clicked on. He was in my driveway. I dropped to the floor, heart racing, and crawled toward my nightstand to grab the house phone. The footsteps started again, crunching across the gravel, slow and deliberate. Then came a soft rattle at the front door. The knob turned once. Then again. I wanted to scream, but I didn't move. I could hear him breathing. I swear I could, through the thin wooden door. And then as suddenly as it started, it stopped. No footsteps, no sound. Just silence. I stayed on the floor until dawn, every light in my room on, gripping the phone and waiting for that knob to turn again. But it never did. By morning, I was exhausted but alive. The sun made everything feel a little less terrifying, and I almost convinced myself it was just some random guy passing through, until I went downstairs. The front doorknob was smeared with dirt, like someone had grabbed it with muddy hands. And there, on the porch, was my missing doormat. But it wasn't where it used to be. It had been moved about 3 feet forward, perfectly centered, like someone had placed it there on purpose. That's when I noticed the footprints. Bare ones. A full trail of them, leading from the edge of the yard right up to my front door. They were big, definitely a man's, and half frozen into the frosty grass. My stomach dropped when I saw that they circled the house. Whoever it was had walked all the way around, stopping at every window. That's when the banging started. Loud, violent from the back door. I screamed and ran upstairs, locking myself in the bathroom. The pounding echoed through the house, shaking the walls, then suddenly silence again. I called 911 with shaking hands. It felt like forever before the dispatcher picked up. When the police arrived, I watched from my bedroom window as they searched the property. They didn't find anyone, but one of the officers called me outside to look at something. Behind the garage, in the snow, were more footprints, fresh ones, leading toward the trees behind our house. The officer followed them for about 30 feet before stopping. He turned back and shook his head. "They just stop here," he said quietly. "No prints going back." After that night, I begged my parents to let me stay at a friend's house the rest of the weekend. I didn't want to be alone, not after what had happened. They tried to reassure me, saying it was probably a drifter or some kids pulling a prank, but I knew better. Whoever had been outside my house had been deliberate. We reported everything to the police, the footprints, the doormat, the back door handle. They said they would patrol the area, but like before, nothing ever came of it. No one was caught. No explanation was ever given. Even now, years later, I still get that creeping feeling when I'm home alone. Sometimes I'll glance out the window late at night, and for a second, I swear I see a shadow lingering near the streetlight, just out of reach. I try to tell myself it's just my imagination, but the truth is I'll never really know who or what was watching me that weekend. And every time I close my blinds at night, I can't help but feel that the next knock or the next set of footsteps could be just around the corner. I was 21 and had just moved into a small rental cabin about 20 miles outside of Asheville, North Carolina. I needed a quiet place to write, away from the city and all its distractions. The cabin was surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides, and the only neighbors were a mile down the dirt road. It felt like paradise until it didn't. The first few nights were peaceful. I would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the wind in the trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. But one night, around 9 p.m., I heard something strange, faint footsteps on the gravel driveway. I figured it was a deer or maybe a raccoon, so I ignored it. Then I heard it again. Louder this time, closer to the porch. I froze. The sounds weren't random. They were deliberate. By the time I turned on the porch light, there was nothing there, just shadows moving in the trees. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining it. Something was out there, and it was watching. The next few nights were worse. Every evening, around the same time, I'd hear the crunch of gravel under slow, deliberate steps. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just a neighbor walking their dog or some late-night wildlife. But the timing was always too precise, right when I was settling in with my laptop or a book. One night, I was making dinner when I noticed something odd through the kitchen window. There, at the edge of the driveway, was a figure. Tall, thin, wearing dark clothing. I froze, hoping they wouldn't notice me. The porch light flickered as if on cue, and for a moment, the figure seemed to hesitate, then disappeared into the trees. After that, I started noticing other things. My firewood pile had been shifted slightly, like someone had leaned against it. My trash can had been knocked over, though it hadn't rained or been windy. I double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows, but the feeling didn't leave me. Whoever, or whatever, was out there seemed to know I was home alone. One night, around 11 p.m., I heard a soft tapping at the front window. Just 3 taps. I held my breath, barely daring to move. When I looked, there was nothing, no movement, no shadow, just the empty driveway. Still, the sense of being watched was overwhelming. It wasn't like someone sneaking around for fun. It was calculated, like they were studying me, learning my habits, waiting for the perfect moment. By then, I stopped leaving the porch light on and kept every door locked. I didn't answer the phone when it rang late at night, and I started sleeping with my laptop under my pillow, just in case I had to call for help. It all escalated one Friday night. I was sitting on the couch, trying to focus on my writing, when I heard it again, the crunching of gravel, slow and deliberate, coming closer. This time, I didn't move. I just sat there, heart hammering, listening as the steps reached the edge of the porch. Then came a knock. Soft at first, but deliberate, on the front door. I froze. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, ready to call 911. Another knock. Louder. Closer. I slowly edged toward the window to look. Outside, just under the porch light, was a man. Tall, hooded, and motionless. The light cast shadows over his face, but I could see him staring straight at me. My stomach dropped. He didn't knock again. He didn't leave. He just stood there. I backed away, my phone trembling in my hands, and dialed the police. I whispered into the phone, barely able to keep my voice steady. Meanwhile, I could hear him moving, slow, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. A branch snapped, then another. He was moving along the edge of the woods, but always within sight, always just close enough to make my heart race. I tried to tell myself to stay calm, that maybe he was drunk or lost. But when I looked out the window again, he was at the side of the cabin. One hand pressed lightly against the siding, just above the motion sensor light, like he was testing it. I couldn't believe he had walked all the way around so quietly, so deliberately. The footsteps stopped suddenly. For a moment, I thought he had gone. But then I heard breathing, low and steady, coming from the back door. I crept toward the bedroom, locking every door behind me, my pulse pounding in my ears. The sound of movement followed me, circling the cabin as I tried to stay silent. By the time the police arrived 15 minutes later, the man was gone. No footprints in the snow leading away. No tire tracks, no evidence. Just the lingering feeling that someone had been watching me, tracking me, testing me, and that if I had made the wrong move, I might not have survived. That night, it got worse. Around 1 a.m., I woke to the sound of the back door rattling, heavy, insistent knocks, like someone was trying to force it open. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, but I could barely breathe. The doorknob twisted slightly under the pressure of someone's hand. I backed into the corner of the room, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Then I heard it, the faint scrape of a shoe against the wooden porch, moving toward the side window. I crept to the window, heart hammering, and peeked through the blinds. He was there, standing just a few feet away, his face still obscured in shadows. One hand pressed lightly against the glass, the other tucked into his pocket. I swear I could see him studying me, like he knew I was terrified and was savoring it. I dropped to the floor and crawled toward the bedroom, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the phone to call the police. The dispatcher tried to calm me, but all I could hear were footsteps circling the cabin outside, slow, deliberate, coming closer, then fading, then closer again. Then silence. I stayed on the floor for what felt like hours, listening for the slightest sound. When the police finally arrived, they found nothing. No footprints in the dirt, no forced entry, no signs of anyone leaving. Just the quiet, empty woods surrounding the cabin and the lingering echo of someone who had been there moments before. I never found out who it was. I never got an explanation. But the sense of being watched didn't leave me. Not when I slept, not when I left the cabin, not even now when I think back. After that night, I couldn't stay in the cabin alone. I packed up the essentials and stayed with a friend in town for the next week, trying to convince myself I was safe. The police never found anyone, no footprints leading away, no evidence left behind, nothing. It was as if the person had vanished into thin air. I tried to return once, just to grab some things, but the feeling of being watched was immediate, suffocating. I didn't stay long. From that moment on, I realized I could never fully relax in that area again. Even months later, when I drove past the cabin during the day, I'd get that same prickling sense on the back of my neck, like someone was still there, hidden in the woods, waiting. I sometimes wonder if he knew I had left, if he ever came back to the empty cabin, or if he's still out there, watching other people, quietly testing their nerves. All I know is that the woods behind that cabin are silent now, but silence doesn't mean safety. And every time I see a dark shadow in a quiet place, I can't help but check the windows, just in case he's watching again.